Before we dive into today's journey, have you ever experienced something strange while out camping? Share your story in the comments below, and let's build this haven of eerie campfire tales together. It wasn't my first job, and it sure as hell wasn't supposed to be my last, but something about that night didn't sit right from the beginning. Maybe it was the silence on the dispatch call, or the way the wind howled across the San Rafael desert, as if it knew something I didn't. I should have listened to that instinct, the one that makes your gut twist and your hands clench the steering wheel tighter than usual. But when the money's right, sometimes you take a job you wouldn't otherwise. The rig hummed beneath me as I barreled down I-70 heading west. The sky was bruised with the last light of day, purple streaks fading into a storm building on the horizon. I had a long way to go and no time to waste. They said the cargo was sensitive, needed to be kept at exactly 20 degrees, and if I messed up, there'd be hell to pay. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What bothered me was not knowing what the hell I was hauling. When they don't tell you what's in the trailer, it's never good. My name's Roy Mallister, bones to the few truckers who still know me on the road. 45 years old, and I've spent the last 20 behind the wheel. The road used to be a kind of escape for me, a way to outrun the things I didn't want to face. But that was before Carol passed, before I let everything else fall apart, including my relationship with my daughter, Emily. Haven't talked to her in years, and I don't think about it much anymore. I'm good at avoiding things like that. But tonight, something felt different. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side of me, just red rock and dry air as far as the eye could see. I hadn't seen another car in miles, which was fine by me. The last thing I needed was distractions. That is, until the dashboard flashed red and the trailer's cooling unit flickered for the first time. I muttered a curse, pulling the rig over onto the shoulder. I cut the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed out into the gathering dusk. The wind hit me hard, dust swirling around my boots as I made my way to the back of the trailer. I could hear the cooling unit working and stuttering like it was trying to fight off some kind of malfunction. Fumbling with the latch, I yanked open the back door and was greeted with a gust of frigid air. It smelled wrong in there, like cold metal and something decayed, the kind of smell that sticks in your nose and won't leave. I shined my light into the back, trying to figure out what was causing the problem. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping. No, not tapping, scratching. It was coming from the crate, a large wooden crate strapped down in the center of the trailer, covered in heavy chains. My heart started to pound in my chest, the kind of adrenaline spike that tells you to get the hell out of there. But my feet wouldn't move. I inched closer, flashlight trembling in my grip. The scratching got louder. The crate shifted just slightly, as though something inside was alive. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. I wasn't going to open it. Not in a million years. I slammed the trailer door shut and locked it tight, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Whatever was in that crate, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I was just supposed to get it from point A to point B, no questions asked. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was an animal, I thought, some government experiment or something. None of it mattered. All I had to do was deliver the damn thing. The radio crackled to life as I accelerated, and I jumped in my seat. Static. Then, through the fuzz, I heard something faint, a voice. A woman's voice. "Roy, why didn't you come back?" My heart stuttered. The voice sounded like Carol's. I smacked the side of the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the static only grew louder. The voice faded, replaced by an eerie, distorted country song, one I hadn't heard since she passed. It was one of her favorites. "No," I muttered, turning the radio off. This was just stress getting to me. The isolation, the weird cargo, and the fact that I hadn't slept in 2 days. That's all it was. That's what I told myself as I sped down that endless stretch of highway. But the farther I drove, the worse it got. The storm hit an hour later, and with it came the figures. I thought they were just shadows at first, shapes in the mist thrown up by the desert sandstorm. But as the wind howled and the sand lashed against the windshield, I could swear I saw them. People walking along the roadside. No, not people. Ghosts. Old men in trucker caps, women in long, flowing dresses, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes dark as the night. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying not to look. If I didn't look, they weren't real. That's how it works, right? I blinked hard, forcing my eyes back on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. The trailer lurched hard, like something had slammed into the back of it. "What the hell?" I shouted, swerving the rig as I fought for control. My headlights cut through the dust, illuminating the desolate highway, but there was nothing there. Nothing but empty miles. The trailer shook again, then came the knocking, loud, rhythmic, like someone was pounding on the inside of the crate. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was done pretending it was nothing. I was done lying to myself. I had to stop. I had to see what was in that crate. I pulled the rig to the side of the road again, hands trembling as I jumped out of the cab. The wind whipped sand into my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't care. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox and made my way to the back of the trailer. The knocking hadn't stopped. It was louder now, more urgent. With a deep breath, I unlocked the trailer and threw the doors open. The cold hit me again, but this time it wasn't just the refrigeration. There was something wrong about it. The air inside was thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on me. I raised the crowbar, jammed it under the lid of the crate, and pried it open. And then everything stopped. The wind, the knocking, even the pounding of my own heart. Inside the crate, nestled in layers of straw and old cloth, was something small. It looked like a statue, a human skull, but blackened, with strange symbols carved into the bone. It seemed to pulse, like it was alive, like it was breathing in time with me. And then the whispers started, not from the radio this time, but from the skull itself. Voices swirling in my head, speaking in languages I couldn't understand. But one voice stood out, one voice I knew, Roy. I stumbled back, my heart racing as the skull began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The voices grew louder and the wind picked up again, howling around the trailer. I slammed the crate shut and bolted the door. I didn't care what they said. I didn't care what I'd seen. I was getting the hell out of there. I threw the crowbar into the cab, jumped behind the wheel, and floored it. The trailer lurched behind me as I tore down the highway faster than I'd ever driven in my life. The storm whipped around me, and through the swirling dust, I could see them again. The figures. They were closer now, standing on either side of the road, their eyes following me. Some of them looked familiar, faces I'd seen on the road before, long dead truckers, friends. Then, as if the storm itself parted, I saw her. Carol, standing in the middle of the road. Her white dress flowing in the wind, her eyes locked on mine. I jerked the wheel, swerving to avoid her, but the rig skidded off the road. The trailer jackknifed as it skidded across the desert sand. I barely managed to hang on as the truck groaned to a stop, tilted sideways in a ditch. Silence. I sat there for a long time, staring out into the empty desert, trying to breathe. The storm passed, but I knew it wasn't over. I reached for my phone. No signal. No way out. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, I saw her again. Carol walking slowly toward me. Her face pale and cold, her eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. "Roy," she whispered, her voice soft but clear in the stillness. "It's time to come home." I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just sat there waiting as the darkness closed in around me. You get used to the rhythm of the road after a while, the hum of the engine beneath you, the steady pull of the truck, the highway stretching out like a never-ending ribbon. It's a kind of solitude I've come to appreciate over the years. I'm Ben Grady, though most folks call me Bear on account of my size, and I've been behind the wheel for a long time. Trucking's simple. You pick up a load, drop it off, and keep moving. That's what I liked about it. But this job was different from the start. I'd picked up the trailer in Chicago. The client was a slick, suited guy, one of those corporate types, barely even looked at me as he handed over the papers. "Keep the trailer locked," he said like it was the most natural thing in the world. "No stops, no questions." I should have known something was off. The pay was double the usual rate, too good for a straightforward haul across I-80 to Salt Lake City. But I was behind on bills, and after the divorce, well, you don't say no to easy money. Now, Somewhere between Kearney and North Platte, Nebraska, in the dead of night, that easy money was starting to feel like blood money. The road was empty, save for the occasional distant glow of farmhouses, but otherwise it was just me, my rig, and miles of flat highway, nothing but darkness ahead and behind. My truck's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the white lines on the road, but something about the blackness beyond felt heavier than usual, like it was waiting. I tried not to think too hard about it. Just keep driving, get to Salt Lake, drop the load, and forget about it. Simple. But then the first strange thing happened. The truck's temperature gauge started going haywire, flipping between cold and hot so fast I thought it was broken. First, the cab was freezing, then it was sweltering, all within minutes. I pulled over onto the shoulder, popped the hood, and checked the engine. Everything looked fine. I chalked it up to a glitch in the electronics. These rigs are built to last, but every now and then something acts up. Satisfied I wasn't about to fry the engine, I climbed back in. But as I settled into the driver's seat, I heard it, a soft thump from the trailer. I froze, my hand halfway to the ignition. It was faint, but there was no mistaking it. Something had moved in the back. I forced myself to breathe slowly. It's nothing, probably just the cargo shifting. Hell, I didn't even know what was in there, but heavy loads can settle like that. Still, a knot twisted in my gut. It was too quiet, too deliberate. For a second, I thought about checking the trailer, but the client's voice echoed in my mind. Keep it locked. No stops, no questions. Fine. I wasn't going to ask any questions, and I sure as hell wasn't going to break the lock. I fired up the engine and got back on the road, but the tension lingered. The temperature gauge flickered again. I adjusted the air vents, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. A few miles down the highway, the radio crackled to life. I nearly jumped out of my seat. "Ben," a voice whispered through the static. I stared at the CB, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't heard another trucker's voice all night. The road was dead empty. The voice on the radio, though, it wasn't a trucker. It was my voice. I grabbed the mic, my knuckles white around it. "Who the hell is this?" The static fizzled, then came back stronger, hissing and popping in my ears. "Ben, you need to stop." I dropped the mic like it was burning my hand, cursing under my breath. It had to be a prank, someone screwing around on the frequency, maybe picking up my name from a previous broadcast. But that didn't make sense. The only chatter I'd had was hours ago, and I hadn't said much more than where I was heading. As I stared at the radio, a chill crawled over me. Then the trailer thumped again, louder this time. I jerked my eyes to the side mirror, half expecting to see something clawing its way out of the trailer. But all I saw was the dark outline of the rig behind me, its taillights glowing faintly in the blackness. Another thump, followed by a low scratching sound like nails on metal. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I was getting out and checking the damn thing. To hell with the lock. Maybe the cargo had shifted, maybe there was an animal in there. I didn't care. I just needed to know. I pulled over again, this time in the middle of nowhere. The road was surrounded by nothing but fields and distant silos. I climbed out of the cab, the cold night air biting at my skin, and grabbed the key from my pocket. As I approached the back of the trailer, the scratching grew louder, more frantic. Whatever was in there, it was alive. I unlocked the heavy padlock, my heart pounding in my ears, and swung open the doors. The smell hit me first. Not the musty smell of old cargo, but something far worse. A stench of decay, like something rotten in the dark. My stomach churned, but I lifted my flashlight and pointed it inside. For a moment, I thought the trailer was empty, but then I saw it. At the far end of the trailer, hunched in the shadows, was a figure. It was humanoid but twisted, like its body had been mangled and warped. Its limbs were too long, its skin pale and slick, almost translucent. The thing was huddled against the wall, its back to me, but I could hear it breathing, shallow and rapid. "What the hell?" I whispered, stepping back, the beam of my flashlight shaking. The thing turned its face, if you could call it that. It was a mess of raw red flesh, eyes sunken deep into its skull, staring at me with a mix of hunger and desperation. Its mouth opened in a wet, gaping maw, and I heard a low, guttural hiss escape its throat. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. My body screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but my feet were frozen to the spot. The creature moved, its elongated limbs unfolding as it dragged itself toward me. Each step was punctuated by the sickening sound of its flesh scraping against the metal floor. I didn't think. I just slammed the trailer door shut and fumbled with the lock. My fingers trembled so hard I could barely get it secured. The thing inside let out a shriek, a sound so unnatural, so piercing, it felt like it was burrowing into my skull. I stumbled back to the cab, my legs shaking beneath me, and jumped inside, slamming the door shut behind me. For a moment, I just sat there, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What the hell had I just seen? What had they put in my truck? I knew I couldn't stay parked on the side of the road, not with whatever that thing was still inside. I had to move, get away from here. But I also knew I couldn't drive that thing to Salt Lake. No way. Whatever was in the back of my trailer, it wasn't going to make it to its destination. I grabbed the CB mic again, my hand shaking. "This is Ben Grady." I hesitated, glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see the creature clawing its way out. "I need help. There's something in my trailer." Static. Then, through the crackling noise, I heard it again. "Ben, you need to stop." My voice, clearer this time, like it was coming from right beside me. I slammed the mic down, shifting into gear and pulling back onto the road. I didn't know where I was going anymore. Just away. Away from that thing. Away from whatever nightmare I'd gotten myself into. As I sped down the highway, the temperature gauge flickered again, this time dropping into the red. The cab grew colder. My breath was visible in the air, and I could hear the trailer groaning behind me. The thing inside was still moving, still scratching, trying to get out. The radio crackled one last time. "Ben, it's too late." I glanced at the dashboard. Every light was blinking. The engine sputtered as the temperature dropped even lower. I could feel the rig slowing, like the weight of the trailer was dragging it down, like whatever was inside was getting heavier by the second. And then the truck stopped dead in the middle of the highway. The engine cut out. The lights flickered before plunging me into complete darkness. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The only sound was the soft, steady scratching from the trailer behind me. The door handle rattled. Something pressed against the cab from the outside, its weight heavy enough to rock the truck. I didn't turn. I didn't want to see what was trying to get in, but I knew it wouldn't be long before the door opened. That's the last I remember. When they found me the next morning, the rig was empty. No sign of the trailer, no sign of the cargo. Just me, sitting in the cab, frozen stiff, my breath still fogging in the cold morning air. I never asked what happened to the trailer. Some things are better left locked away. I hadn't planned on staying at Stillwater Grove. The campground wasn't even marked on my map, just a small patch of green near the edge of Shawnee National Forest. But as I drove down the empty forest road, I saw the sign. Old, weathered wood with the words Stillwater Grove Campground carved into it. It felt like an invitation, one I couldn't resist. I had been on the road for weeks, photographing wildlife for a personal project I had picked up after quitting my job. The last few months had been a blur of long drives, lonely campsites, and an overwhelming need to be anywhere but back in the city. I didn't miss my corporate job or my ex. What I did miss was the feeling that I knew what the hell I was doing with my life. Stillwater Grove seemed perfect, quiet, isolated, and right by the lake. It would give me the break I needed, some peace before heading back into the real world. When I pulled into the campsite, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grove. The air was still, the only sound being the gentle lapping of water against the shore. A single RV sat on the far side of the campground, a distant figure moving near it. Otherwise, it was just me. I parked my RV near the edge of the lake, the water glistening under the fading light. After setting up camp, I grabbed my camera and headed toward the shore, hoping to catch the sunset. As I stood there, framing the perfect shot, a voice startled me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I turned to see a woman standing a few feet away, her face half in shadow. She had an otherworldly kind of beauty, pale skin, long dark hair, and eyes that seemed to take in everything. "Yeah," I replied, lowering my camera. "It's peaceful." She smiled. "It always is here." "I'm Ellie, by the way." "Nick," I said, shaking her outstretched hand. Her skin was cold, like she had been standing in the shade for too long. "You camping here too?" For a little while, she said, her voice soft. I come here every now and then, can't stay away. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. I wasn't used to talking to people much anymore. The solitude had become my comfort zone, and something about Ellie felt out of place. You here for the fishing? I asked, trying to make small talk. She shook her head. No, just the lake, the quiet. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky turned shades of pink and orange, the water reflecting the colors like a mirror. I raised my camera, snapping a few shots, and when I looked back, Ellie was gone. Just like that. I glanced around, but there was no sign of her. The other RV was still parked at the far end of the grove, but there was no movement. I chalked it up to her being quick on her feet, though it left me feeling oddly unsettled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up, making the trees outside rustle against each other like whispered secrets. I rolled over in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but something felt off. The RV was too cold. Colder than it should have been. I checked the thermostat, but everything seemed normal. Still, the chill lingered. I grabbed a blanket and tried to force myself to sleep. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible at first, like a woman's voice carried on the wind. I sat up, listening, but it was gone. Just my imagination, I thought. Long days alone in the woods will do that to you. But then I heard it again. This time it was clearer. A soft, melodic humming coming from outside. I climbed out of bed, grabbing my flashlight. My breath fogged up in the cold air as I stepped outside the RV, scanning the campsite. Nothing. Just the stillness of the lake and the trees swaying gently in the wind. But the humming persisted, coming from near the water's edge. I walked toward the shore, the beam of my flashlight dancing over the ground. And that's when I saw her. A woman in white, standing at the edge of the lake, her back to me. Her long, dark hair hung loose down her back, swaying slightly as she hummed that haunting tune. Ellie? I called out, my voice shaking. She didn't turn. She just stood there, motionless, her gaze fixed on the water. Something about the way she stood, so still, so rigid, set my nerves on edge. I took a step closer, the flashlight illuminating her pale figure. But as soon as the light touched her, she vanished. I blinked, stunned. 1 second, she had been there, and the next, she was gone. The water rippled where she had been standing, but otherwise, the lake was empty. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was that? I hurried back to the RV, locking the door behind me. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps. My hands were shaking. I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural nonsense, but what I had seen, it wasn't right. I had seen her. I knew I had. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to rationalize what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of that woman standing by the lake. The next morning, I found Ellie near the grove, sitting by a small campfire. She smiled when she saw me, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Rough night? She asked, as if she already knew. Yeah, I said, sitting down across from her. I saw something last night. A woman by the lake. I thought it was you, but she wasn't there when you got close. Ellie finished, her voice calm, too calm. The Lady of Stillwater. The what? I asked, feeling a chill run through me. Ellie looked at me, her eyes dark and hollow. She's been here for a long time, longer than the campground, longer than the trees. She drowned in the lake, or so the story goes. Some say she was waiting for someone. Her lover, I think, but he never showed. I stared at her, my stomach twisting. You're telling me she's a ghost? Ellie shrugged. Call it what you want, but she's real. And now that you've seen her, she won't let you go. I laughed, though it came out shaky. That's insane. Is it? Ellie asked, her gaze locking onto mine. You saw her. You know she's real. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died in my throat. I had seen her, and it hadn't been a trick of the light or my imagination. Something had been there. Something that shouldn't have been. What does she want? I asked quietly. Ellie's eyes flicked toward the lake. She wants what she's always wanted. To take someone with her into the water. That night, the sound started again. At first, it was the soft humming, drifting through the night air. Then the splashing, gentle, rhythmic, like someone wading through the water. I lay in bed, my heart racing, my body tense. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to see her again. But the pull was stronger this time. A A strange compulsion tugged at me, drawing me toward the lake. I tried to fight it, to stay in the RV, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me outside into the cold night air. The lake was calm, reflecting the pale moonlight. And there she was, standing in the water, her white dress billowing around her as if moved by an unseen current. "Come to me," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. "Please, come." I took a step forward, my body moving against my will. The water lapped at my shoes, and I could feel the cold seeping into my skin. "Come with me," she said again, her voice almost pleading now. "I've waited so long." I fought to resist, to break free from whatever force was drawing me in. But my feet kept moving, the water now up to my knees, freezing cold. I could feel the pull of the lake, the weight of the water dragging me down. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back with such force that I stumbled onto the shore. Ellie stood beside me, her face pale, her grip strong. "You have to leave," she said, her voice urgent now, "before it's too late." I looked back at the lake, but the woman was gone. The water was still, as if nothing had happened. "What the hell is happening?" I gasped, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Ellie's expression was grim. "She's marked you now. If you stay, she'll take you. You have to go." I didn't argue. I packed up my things, my hands shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Within minutes, I was back in the RV, starting the engine and pulling out of the campsite as fast as I could. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ellie stood at the edge of the grove, watching me go, her face unreadable. And behind her, just barely visible in the mist, was the Lady of Stillwater. Her pale eyes followed me, waiting for me to return. I didn't look back again. There's a peace you find on the road late at night when the only thing lighting your way is your own headlights slicing through the dark. No noise, no distractions, just you, the hum of the engine, and the endless stretch of asphalt. That's why I love it out here. There's no mess, nothing like the life I left behind, just the road. My name's Lucas Turner, but most folks call me Lucky. It's an old nickname from when I used to get myself out of sticky situations, both on and off the road. I guess I've lived up to it, though I've never been one for superstition. If you stay calm and keep moving forward, things usually work out. But that night on Route 2, the nickname didn't feel so fitting anymore. I'd left Seattle earlier that day, hauling a load of electronics to a distribution center in North Dakota. A long stretch of mostly empty highway lay between me and the drop-off, but I didn't mind. It was a quiet night, just the way I liked it. No cars, no people, just the stars overhead and the empty plains around me. The deeper I drove into Montana, the quieter it got. Nothing but the hum of my rig and the occasional flicker of static on the CB. But somewhere along that desolate stretch of US Route 2, the static changed. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It started to sound something trying to break through, a faint voice hidden in the distortion. I adjusted the dial, trying to clear it up, but all I got was more static. After a few minutes, the voice faded, and I figured it was just some distant radio chatter from a passing trucker. I wasn't tired yet, but I was getting there. I hadn't slept much since the divorce, and nights like this, long and quiet, always gave me too much time to think. Sometimes you drive to outrun what's on your mind. Problem is, it's always waiting for you when you stop. Just as I was about to switch the CB off and turn up my music, the radio crackled to life again. This time, the voice was clearer, a low monotone that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. 7-52, it said, repeating the number slowly like it was reading coordinates. I grabbed the mic and keyed up. "This is Lucky Turner, eastbound on Route 2. You got a copy?" Nothing, just static. Then the voice again, quieter this time. 7-52, you need to stop. I frowned, the words sending a chill through me. I hadn't heard anyone nearby on the CB all night, so where the hell was this coming from? I glanced at the GPS out of habit, but it showed nothing unusual, just the straight road ahead. I kept driving, trying to shake off the unease. About an hour later, the same numbers came through again. But this time, it wasn't just numbers. "Lucas." I slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road so fast the rig shuddered beneath me. The voice had said my name. I cut the engine, my heart racing. The radio was dead silent now, nothing but the low hum of static like the voice had never been there at all. I rubbed my hands together, trying to calm down. It had to be some kind of weird signal bounce, maybe from a nearby base, old military broadcasts or something. That happens sometimes out here. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I stepped out of the cab, needing to clear my head, and breathed in the cold, crisp night air. The road was dead empty. Nothing but flat plains and dark woods on either side. No headlights, no signs of life. I walked around the truck, stretching my legs, telling myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. But when I glanced down the road, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. At first, I thought it was another trucker, but the lights didn't seem to be moving. They just sat there. I watched for a minute, waiting for the truck to approach, but it never did. The lights stayed exactly where they were, flickering slightly in the dark. Something about them didn't feel right. It was like they were watching me. "Don't be an idiot, Lucky," I muttered to myself, climbing back into the cab. But as I settled into the driver's seat and fired up the engine again, I couldn't shake the feeling that those lights were still there, even as I pulled away. I pushed the truck hard, wanting to put some distance between me and whatever was behind me. But the farther I drove, the more the radio interference grew. It was subtle at first, just little bursts of static. But then it got louder, and within that static, I could hear it again. "Lucas, 7252. I checked the mirrors, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when I saw the convoy. 3 trucks, old military rigs by the look of them. They were in a tight formation, following about 100 yards behind me. I hadn't passed them on the road, hadn't seen them pull out from anywhere. They were just there, like they'd appeared out of nowhere. My grip tightened on the wheel. I had 2 options: stop and let them pass, or keep going and pretend like nothing was wrong. My gut told me to keep going, but no matter how fast I drove, the trucks stayed right behind me, their headlights burning bright in the dark. And that voice, Eddie's voice, kept slipping through the static on the CB. "You need to stop, Lucas." I slammed my fist on the dashboard, adrenaline surging through me. This couldn't be real. Eddie was dead, had been for years. And yet his voice kept coming, clear as day, telling me to stop. I passed a small sign on the roadside, Deadwood Ridge, 2 miles. That's where the voice had been leading me. 7052, it was a set of coordinates that pointed directly to Deadwood Ridge. I didn't want to go there. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to get as far away as possible, but the voice, Eddie's voice, had a pull I couldn't shake. Something was waiting for me there. Something I had to face. When the turnoff for Deadwood Ridge appeared, my hands moved before my mind could catch up. I took the exit. The old, narrow road wound through thick trees, and as soon as I turned, the convoy behind me vanished. Just like that. Gone. The road twisted and turned, narrowing with every mile, until I came to an old gate, rusted, broken, hanging off its hinges. Beyond it, hidden in the woods, I could see the remains of an old military base, abandoned, decaying like something out of a nightmare. I cut the engine and stepped out into the cold, my breath fogging in the air. The place was silent. The only sound was the wind whistling through the trees. My gut told me to leave, but my feet kept moving, pulling me toward the base. Inside the fence, I found an old radio tower. Its rusted skeleton still stood against the night sky. At the base of the tower, there was a small building, just a single room, the door hanging open. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on the broken concrete, and that's when I saw it. An old military radio still running, its dials glowing faintly in the dark. The static from the CB was coming from here, filling the room with that same eerie hum I'd heard on the road. And then, from the radio, Eddie's voice again. "Lucas, it's time to stop." The temperature dropped sharply, and I felt something behind me, something watching. I turned, and there he was, Eddie, standing in the doorway, just as he had been the day he died. His eyes were hollow, his face pale, his expression blank. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Eddie." He didn't respond, just stared at me, unmoving. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words choking out of me. "I should have been there. I should have." Eddie's face twisted, his mouth opened in a silent scream, and suddenly the radio exploded in a burst of static. The air around me felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest, and I staggered back, my pulse racing. "Lucas," Eddie's voice rasped from the radio, distorted and wrong. "Stop now." The lights in the building flickered, and for a moment, everything went black. When they came back on, Eddie was gone. The radio was silent. I didn't wait for an explanation. I bolted out of the building, ran back to the truck, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. The engine roared as I tore down the road. I didn't look back. Didn't check the mirrors. I just drove. When I finally got back on Route 2, the radio was silent. No static, no voices. Just the empty road and the stars overhead. I never did figure out what happened that night. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was something else. But I know one thing. I don't drive that stretch of road anymore. Whatever was out there, whatever was calling me to that place, it's something best left alone. Some things, once you hear them, never stop echoing. I thought this trip would fix everything. I believed that a week out in the woods, just me and Tyler, would somehow repair the damage from the past year. The divorce hit him harder than it hit me. And that's saying something. I thought maybe, out here in the quiet, away from the distractions of phones in the city, we could connect again. You know, like fathers and sons are supposed to. But from the moment we hit the road, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Tyler barely looked up from his phone the entire drive, earbuds in, scrolling mindlessly. He didn't care about the scenery, didn't care that we were headed to Deadwood Creek, a place I used to go with my own dad when I was his age. It's funny how history repeats itself. My father and I never really saw eye to eye either. He'd brought me out here, hoping to teach me how to be a man, how to survive in the wilderness, and now here I was doing the same with Tyler, hoping the Black Hills would heal something in both of us. I glanced at him as we pulled into the campground. He didn't even notice the tall, dark pines surrounding us, swaying lightly in the wind. A dense fog had settled over the creek, and the sound of water trickling nearby was the only noise besides the RV's engine. It felt different than I remembered, more isolated, lonelier. "This is it," I said, more to myself than to Tyler. "Cool," he mumbled, still scrolling, not even looking up. I sighed, cutting the engine. After we set up camp, I suggested a short hike to check out the creek. Tyler grumbled but followed me. The trail was just as I remembered, narrow, winding through the trees, with the creek gurgling beside us. There was something peaceful about it, but also something off. The further we went, the heavier the air felt, like the forest was watching us. We reached the creek's edge, where the water ran fast over the rocks. I crouched down, letting the cool water run over my hand. "This place used to be full of miners back in the gold rush days," I said, trying to make conversation. "A lot of people came out here looking to strike it rich. Some of them didn't make it out." Tyler shrugged. "I guess," he said. I stood up and brushed off my hands, frustrated. "You know, you could try enjoying this." He looked up from his phone for the first time and scowled. "I didn't ask to come here." I bit my tongue, holding back the argument that wanted to burst out. "Let's head back to camp." As we turned to leave, something flickered in my peripheral vision. I stopped, squinting through the trees. There, just at the edge of the clearing, a dim light floated in the distance. It flickered like a lantern, swaying in the wind. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing toward the trees. Tyler glanced up, following my gaze. "What? That light?" It was gone. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Maybe I'd imagined it. The fog had thickened while we were by the creek, and the woods were growing darker. "Never mind. Let's go." The first night was when things started getting weird. Tyler and I had retreated to the RV after dinner. He was predictably glued to his phone while I tried to read a book, but the quiet gnawed at me. The stillness outside felt oppressive rather than peaceful. The wind had picked up, and the pines swayed ominously against the backdrop of the night. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind, a soft, barely there sound, like whispers carried on the breeze. But as I listened, it grew more distinct. Not the wind. Voices. Faint, disembodied voices murmuring just outside the RV. "Did you hear that?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "What?" Tyler didn't even look up. "The voices outside." Tyler pulled out one of his earbuds, frowning. "What are you talking about?" I stood up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. Nothing but fog and trees. But I could still hear the whispers just at the edge of hearing, like they were coming from the creek. I shook my head, probably just the wind. Tyler rolled his eyes and went back to his phone, but something about those whispers unsettled me. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The next morning, the air felt even heavier. Tyler was still distant, sulking around camp, so I suggested another hike, hoping it would clear the tension between us. He reluctantly agreed, and we set off down the trail again, heading back toward the creek. But this time, the unease I'd felt the day before was stronger. Every rustle in the trees, every crack of a branch set me on edge. As we walked, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched was constant now, like eyes were following us from the shadows. Then I saw it again. The light. This time, it was brighter, flickering between the trees ahead of us, moving slowly, like a lantern being carried by an unseen hand. "There it is," I whispered, grabbing Tyler's arm. "Do you see it?" He stopped, frowning. What are you talking about?" The light flickered in and out, growing dimmer before vanishing completely. I took a step forward, but Tyler grabbed my arm. "Dad, let's just go back." I wanted to argue, but the look on his face, the fear in his eyes, stopped me. Truth be told, I was scared too. "Yeah, let's go." That night, the footsteps started. It was late, maybe past midnight, and I just managed to drift off when I heard them. Slow, deliberate steps crunching on the gravel outside the RV. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something, but the steps were too heavy, too purposeful. I lay there, holding my breath, listening as the footsteps circled the RV. They stopped by the window, then moved to the door. Tyler stirred in his sleep, but didn't wake. I slipped out of bed and grabbed the flashlight. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept toward the window, slowly pulling back the curtain. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, and there, just at the edge of the light, stood a figure. It was tall, dressed in ragged, old-fashioned clothes, like something out of the gold rush era. A wide-brimmed hat covered most of its face, but I could see the gleam of a lantern hanging from its hand. The figure stood perfectly still, just watching the RV. I stumbled back, heart racing. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, searching for a rational explanation, but I couldn't find one. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure turned and vanished into the fog, the light of its lantern disappearing with it. The next day, Tyler was pale and jittery, his usual teenage indifference replaced with genuine fear. He hadn't seen the figure, but he'd heard the footsteps, and the look in his eyes told me he knew something was wrong. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "I know," I replied. "I'll start the RV. We'll head out." But when I turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. The engine sputtered, then went silent. I tried again and again, but the RV wouldn't start. "We're stuck here," I muttered, feeling the weight of dread settle over me. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, they were louder, more insistent. The figure was back, pacing around the RV, dragging something behind it. I could hear the heavy scrape of metal on gravel, like chains being dragged along the ground. "Dad, what is that?" Tyler whispered, his face pale with fear. I didn't have an answer. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped toward the door. "Stay inside," I told him. "No, don't go out there," he begged, grabbing my arm, but I couldn't just sit there listening to the thing outside. I had to confront it. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. The figure was there, standing by the creek, its lantern casting an eerie glow over the water. It didn't move as I approached, just watched me with shadowed eyes. "What do you want?" I shouted, though my voice trembled. "What are you?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly lifted its arm, pointing to the ground near the water's edge. There, half buried in the mud, was an old, rusted gold pan. I didn't understand at first, but then it hit me. The legend, the miner's ghost protecting his lost fortune. I knelt down, my hands trembling, and lifted the pan from the mud. As soon as I touched it, the figure vanished. The footsteps stopped. The whispers and the wind fell silent. The air was lighter. The oppressive weight lifted. I stood there for a long time, holding the gold pan, my mind racing. Then, without looking back, I turned and went back to the RV. The next morning, the RV started without a hitch. We left Deadwood Creek behind, and neither of us spoke about what happened. But as we drove away, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure watching us from the trees. I didn't, but I knew, deep down, that something had happened out there. Something I couldn't explain. Something I would never forget. And maybe, just maybe, Tyler and I would be okay. I never wanted to take the job, certainly not this one. But when the bills pile up and your savings start running dry, you do what you have to, even if it means going back to the place you swore you'd never see again. Dead Man's Pass. It was Eddie's death that did it. 15 years ago, I lost my brother on that road. His rig skidded off a curve and plunged into the canyon. I was driving a mile behind him when it happened, saw the whole thing through my windshield like a damn nightmare unfolding in slow motion. I've never been the same since. I never could forgive myself for not doing more, not being there to help. That's how it goes in this life. You haul, you drive, you move forward, keep the past in the rear view. But it's never that simple, is it? I'm Hank Collins, but most people on the road know me as Rusty. Maybe it's the hair going gray, or maybe it's just the wear and tear of 30 years behind the wheel. I've spent most of my life running rigs, hauling everything from livestock to construction equipment. This time, I was hauling heavy machinery for a mining outfit in Utah. Easy enough, or so I thought. The cargo didn't bother me. What bothered me was the Route 163 through the heart of Monument Valley and then up through Dead Man's Pass, the very stretch of road where Eddie lost his life. I've avoided it for years, but I couldn't avoid it this time. The money was too good, and the job came at a time when I needed it most. The first sign that something wasn't right came when I crossed into the desert. The vast expanse of red rocks stretched out for miles, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. It should have been peaceful, almost beautiful, but there was something off. The radio cut out first. Static, then silence. Not unusual out here, but it didn't sit right. The stillness felt heavy, oppressive, like the desert itself was holding its breath. As the sun slipped away completely, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably another trucker making the same route. But as the miles passed, those headlights didn't get closer. They stayed there, far back but steady, like whoever it was didn't intend to pass or fall behind, just keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. The canyon walls began to rise on either side of me, the road narrowing as I approached Dead Man's Pass. My hands tightened on the wheel, the familiar knot of tension growing in my chest. The road was winding, dangerous, with steep cliffs on one side and jagged rock on the other. I'd driven it 100 times before, but not since the night Eddie died. As I climbed higher, the truck started to act up. First, it was the brakes. They began to make a grinding noise that sent vibrations up through the cab. They were new, serviced just a week ago. No reason they should be failing. Then the engine sputtered. Just once, but enough to make my heart jump. "Come on, Rusty," I muttered to myself. "Just keep moving, 1 mile at a time." But the truck didn't listen. The headlights behind me were still there, never getting any closer, never fading away. Something about it gnawed at me, a slow realization creeping in. I knew that truck. It was Eddie's. It couldn't be. Of course, Eddie's truck was a wreck at the bottom of the canyon, rusted and forgotten. But the make, the model, even the busted left headlight, it was all the same. And it was following me. I turned up the CB, hoping for some noise to drown out my thoughts, but all I got was static. My hands were sweating now, the wheel slick beneath my fingers. The canyon walls seemed to press in tighter as I reached the most dangerous curve, the very spot where Eddie went over the edge. My foot eased off the gas, but then the CB crackled to life and a voice broke through the static. "Rusty, Hank, you got to stop." I nearly jerked the wheel in shock. I knew that voice. It was impossible, but I knew it. It was Eddie. "Eddie," I whispered, even though I knew there was no way it could be real. I fumbled with the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the voice only grew louder, swallowed by the hiss of static. "Rusty, you got to stop. You can't make the same mistake." I was losing my mind. That's what this was. That's what this was. Too many years on the road, too many ghosts haunting me. That's all it was. But then the truck sputtered again. The grinding in the brakes got worse. I could feel the whole rig shudder as I tried to slow down, but the brakes weren't responding. I pumped them hard, but nothing. The curve was coming up fast, and I knew I wouldn't make it if the brakes didn't hold. "Damn it!" I shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right, pulling off onto the narrow shoulder. The truck screeched to a stop, just inches from the cliff's edge. For a long time, I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the drop below. The canyon stretched out beneath me, a black abyss swallowing the last traces of daylight. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking, and then I saw it. Eddie's truck was still there, sitting on the road behind me, headlights glowing dimly through the dust. But now I could see it wasn't just a truck. The rig was mangled, twisted, just like it had been after the accident. The front end was smashed in, the cab crumpled, the windshield shattered, and standing next to it was Eddie. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but he didn't disappear. He was there, as clear as day. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes hollow, but it was him. He was looking right at me. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking beneath me. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I expected to happen, but I had to get closer. I had to see Eddie. My voice cracked as I took a step toward him. How are you? He didn't speak, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. Then slowly he raised a hand, pointing down the canyon. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it, the wreckage of his truck lying at the bottom of the canyon, just as it had been all those years ago. "No," I whispered. This can't be real." Eddie's voice echoed in my mind, though his lips didn't move. "You gotta stop, Rusty. You gotta stop running." I fell to my knees, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had run from this for so long, buried it deep, but now there was no escaping it. Eddie wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here to haunt me. He was here because I'd never let him go. "I'm sorry," I choked out, tears burning my eyes. "I'm sorry, Eddie. It was my fault. I should have listened. I should have stopped." The wind howled through the canyon, and for a moment, it sounded like Eddie was speaking again. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was forgiveness. "I never blamed you, Rusty," his voice whispered, softer now, like it was being carried away by the wind. "But you gotta forgive yourself." The headlights of Eddie's truck flickered once, then went out. The figure standing beside it began to fade, dissolving into the dust and shadows of the canyon. And then he was gone. I sat there on the edge of the road, staring down into the canyon where my brother's truck had fallen. The air was still. The only sound, the soft hum of the desert wind. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally got to my feet, something had shifted inside me. The guilt was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It wasn't tearing me apart from the inside. I could breathe again. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and the brakes responded this time, smooth and steady, as I pulled back onto the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. There was nothing there. No truck, no headlights, just empty miles of desert behind me. I smiled a sad, tired smile. It was time to stop running, time to go home. As I drove through Dead Man's Pass, the echoes of the past faded into the night, leaving only the road ahead. I've always loved the quiet. That's the real reason I camp alone and hike alone. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about the silence, the kind of silence that presses against you like a weight, smoothing out the chaos of everyday life. Out here, far from deadlines and the blaring traffic, I can hear my own thoughts. But it's a fragile thing, the peace that the wilderness offers. I've learned that the quiet can also play tricks on you, turn on you. That's what happened to me in the San Juan National Forest. I'd been camping alone plenty of times before, but this trip was different. I still have trouble putting it into words. All I know is that the silence stopped being my friend somewhere on the second day. I'd planned to be out there for 4 days, just long enough to clear my head and reset. The spot I'd picked was remote, a stretch of dense forest near Pagosa Springs that even the locals didn't visit often. It was perfect, or so I thought. The first day went like it always does. The drive up was uneventful, and after a few hours of hiking, I found the perfect campsite. It was tucked away by a creek, surrounded by towering pines, with a small clearing just big enough for my tent and fire pit. I felt that familiar rush of excitement as I set up camp, the freedom of being out here completely alone with nothing but wilderness around me. That first night was easy. I sat by the fire, listening to the water rush over the rocks in the creek. I wrote in my journal a bit, mostly just notes about the hike and some thoughts about work. Then I crawled into my tent, ready to sleep. The silence was comforting at first, as it always is, but I woke up in the middle of the night to something strange. It was subtle, just a faint whispering sound, like the wind picking up through the trees. I brushed it off, telling myself it was nothing, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next day, things started to go wrong. I woke up later than I'd planned, the sky already a pale blue overhead. My stove was acting up, which was weird because it had worked fine the night before. It just wouldn't light no matter what I tried. I ended up eating cold granola and packing up my camp, ready to move deeper into the forest. That's when I noticed my GPS wasn't working. I'd had reception when I camped here before, but now my phone was useless, no signal at all. I wasn't worried yet, though. I'd brought a map and I knew the area well enough to navigate without technology. Still, the feeling that something wasn't right settled in, and I couldn't shake it. The hike was harder than I expected. My legs felt heavier, like the air itself was weighing me down, and the forest was quiet, too quiet. Normally you'd hear birds or the occasional rustle of squirrels in the underbrush, but today it was just still. The silence felt unnatural. I found another campsite by late afternoon, a little further into the woods next to a meadow that looked untouched. I set up my tent quickly, eager to get a fire going, but as I worked, the feeling of being watched crept up on me. I couldn't shake it. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, nothing was there, just trees and shadows, but the sensation wouldn't leave. That night, I heard the whispers again. This time, they were louder, clearer, and they weren't random. They were saying something, my name. I sat up in my tent, my heart pounding. The sound was faint but unmistakable, drifting on the breeze from somewhere just beyond the clearing. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and shone the light into the trees. Nothing. The forest was still, the fire flickering in the corner of my vision. I stood there for a long time listening, but the whispering had stopped. It was just the wind. It had to be. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. By the third day, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept much the night before, and the feeling of unease had only grown stronger. My gear wasn't cooperating either. When I tried to pack up my tent, I found that the poles had bent. They were new, barely used, but somehow they were warped, like something had twisted them while I slept. It didn't make sense. The whispering was back too, even during the day. It followed me as I hiked, a faint sound on the edge of hearing, like someone walking just out of sight. I kept telling myself it was the wind, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. I wasn't alone out here. Then there was the whistling. It started around midday, just after I'd set up my third camp. At first I thought it was a bird, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. It came from somewhere deep in the woods, a high, clear note that echoed through the trees. I froze, listening. The sound grew louder, closer, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I called out, hoping it was another hiker, someone who'd stumbled across my camp, but there was no response, just silence. I tried to stay calm, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Now it felt like something was circling me, just beyond my vision, waiting. That night, the whispers didn't stop. I lay in my tent, wide awake, listening as the sound of my name drifted through the trees. It was faint at first, like it had been the night before, but as the hours passed, it grew louder, more insistent. Dylan? I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The fire had died down, casting long, flickering shadows across the clearing. I scanned the trees, heart racing, but there was nothing, just darkness. I was about to crawl back into my tent when I saw something move, a shadow slipping between the trees. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was too big to be an animal, and it was moving too deliberately, like it was watching me, waiting. I turned off my flashlight and backed into the tent, my mind racing. I'd never been this scared in the woods before, not once in all the years I'd camped alone. But now, there was something out there. I could feel it. I zipped the tent shut and tried to calm my breathing, but the whispers were inside my head now. They weren't just outside, they were all around me. Dylan. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my tent, clutching the flashlight, listening as the whispers circled me. Sometimes it sounded like one voice, sometimes several, but it was always the same soft, insistent calling of my name. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get out of these woods. But as I started hiking, the whistling began again. This time it was closer, following me like something was walking just behind me, whistling a slow, eerie tune. I didn't stop to look. I didn't want to see whatever it was. I just kept walking faster and faster until I was practically running down the trail. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I froze, heart pounding in my chest, and slowly turned around. There, standing just at the edge of the clearing, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were hollow, and its lips were curled into a grin. It stood there, staring at me, its head cocked to the side as if amused. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The whistling had stopped, and now there was only silence. A silence so thick, it pressed down on me like a weight. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching me, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but eventually I turned and ran. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs felt like they were going to burst. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead where my car was parked. When I finally looked back, the figure was gone. I never told anyone what happened in the San Juan National Forest. Not really. I tried to explain it to myself 1,000 different ways. Exhaustion, anxiety, maybe even altitude sickness. But none of that explains the whispers or the whistling or the figure that watched me from the trees. I haven't been camping since. I'm not sure why I chose the Ocala National Forest. It wasn't really on my radar until a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it's because Megan always talked about it, how beautiful the pine forests were, the springs. She was the nature person, not me. She practically begged me to take her camping here once, back when we were still together. I kept putting it off, using work as an excuse. Now, here I am, in the middle of the forest, alone in my RV, with nothing but my thoughts for company. I needed a break, that's what my doctor said. Unplug, he told me. You need to find yourself again, as if I ever had a real grasp of who I was to begin with. 2 weeks into my forced time off, I wasn't any closer to finding peace or clarity. I felt off. I didn't realize how addicted I was to being connected. No emails, no social media, no news feeds, just silence and isolation. It was what I thought I wanted. The first night in the RV wasn't too bad. I parked in a secluded spot far from the main road, surrounded by towering pine trees. I managed to set up camp without any major problems. I had a fire going, and for a little while, I could almost see the appeal Megan always talked about. There was something peaceful about the forest, about the stillness. But it was the kind of stillness that quickly became unsettling when you were alone. By the time the sun set, the silence had grown thick. The only sound was the wind shifting through the pine needles, and, every so often, the distant call of an owl. I tried to read one of the survival books I'd brought, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to her. Megan. We hadn't spoken since the divorce went through. 3 years of marriage dissolved in less than a month. I couldn't even tell you exactly when things went wrong. I just buried myself in work. She begged me to slow down, to reconnect, but I didn't listen. I told myself I was doing it for us, that the stress was worth it in the end. But by the time I realized how much I'd lost, it was too late. The fire crackled as the temperature dropped. I got up to grab my jacket from inside the RV. That's when I first heard it, a soft tapping sound, like something lightly knocking against the side of the RV. I froze, listening. Tap, tap, tap. I leaned against the door, listening harder. The tapping continued, rhythmic, almost deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, scanning the area around the RV. The light cut through the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. Just trees and shadows. Probably just a branch in the wind, I muttered to myself, though the trees weren't close enough to the RV for that to make sense. I shut the door and locked it. The tapping had stopped, but I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I drifted off, I heard something. Footsteps, rustling things I couldn't explain away as easily as I wanted to. But when I looked outside, the forest was still. The next morning, I found the footprints. They were in the dirt around the RV, large and oddly spaced. Not animal tracks, but not quite human either. They seemed too long, too wide, like someone had been walking on the balls of their feet with unnatural precision. They circled the RV, stopping near the windows before disappearing into the trees. I crouched down to get a better look. The prints were deep, the kind that didn't come from a person casually walking. Whoever or whatever had made them was heavy, deliberate. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though there was no one around. I considered leaving, but I wasn't going to let some footprints freak me out. Besides, my RV wouldn't start. No matter how many times I turned the key, the engine just sputtered and clicked. The GPS on my phone was glitchy too, pointing me in all sorts of random directions before it finally went blank. Great. Just great. I spent most of the day walking, trying to calm my nerves. I stuck to the trails at first, but as the hours passed, I wandered deeper into the forest. The pine trees stretched up endlessly, their trunks so straight and uniform that I started losing track of where I was. I didn't mind being lost, not at first. It distracted me from the unease that had settled in my chest. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, someone standing just beyond the trees. I stopped dead, staring at the figure. It was tall, too tall, and unnaturally still. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd imagined it, but when I looked again, it was still there. A dark shape, humanoid but wrong, standing among the trees, watching me. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the forest. The figure didn't move. I took a step toward it, and in an instant, it vanished. Not as if it walked away, but just gone, as though it had never been there. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the spot where the figure had been, before I finally turned and hurried back toward the RV. That night, the tapping started again, louder this time, more insistent. I lay in bed listening, my heart pounding in my chest. The rhythmic tapping echoed around the RV, coming from all sides. It sounded like someone or something was circling the vehicle, knocking at the walls, at the windows. I couldn't bring myself to move. Then the footsteps started, heavy, deliberate thuds like boots crunching on gravel. They moved slowly, methodically, pacing back and forth outside the RV. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand shaking, and crawled out of bed. "Stop it," I whispered to myself. "You're imagining things. It's nothing." But I wasn't imagining it. I peered through the window, and there it was. The figure, standing just at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the darkness. Its shape was clearer now, a tall, gaunt figure with limbs that seemed too long, too thin. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. I stumbled back from the window, heart racing. The tapping grew more frantic, the footsteps louder. My head spun with fear and confusion. What was it? Why was it here? I bolted for the door, but as I reached for the handle, I heard a voice. "David." I froze. It was Megan's voice, soft, familiar, and unmistakable. "David, come outside." My breath caught in my throat. "Megan?" I whispered, barely able to speak. "Come to me." I stared at the door, my hand trembling on the latch. The voice was so clear, so real, but Megan wasn't here. She couldn't be. It wasn't her. "David, please." The voice grew more insistent, more urgent, but something in the tone was wrong. Off. It wasn't her. It couldn't be. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The tapping and footsteps stopped all at once, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the forest felt different, lighter somehow. The figure was gone, and the RV started on the first try. I didn't waste any time. I packed up and drove away, leaving the forest behind as quickly as I could. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching me. That maybe, just maybe, I didn't leave it behind. Some things can't be explained. Some things I realize now are better left undisturbed. I've always found comfort in the silence of the woods, out here away from people, away from the world. You can think straight. George Washington and Jefferson National Forest had been my sanctuary for years, my escape from the clutter of civilization. But this time, something felt different. It was as if the land itself was holding a secret it didn't want to share. It had been a rough few months. Lisa left me, and I couldn't say I didn't see it coming. I'd been distant, losing myself in work, then losing the work altogether. I thought a few days alone, hunting and camping, would clear my head. I needed space, and the mountains were the only place I knew where I could truly breathe. The plan was simple. 3 days, 4 at most. Head out to the edge of Silent Pines, an area where the deer roam freely and the mountains are still untouched by the tourist crowd. I'd bag a buck, maybe 2, and return with meat for the freezer. Just me, my gear, and the quiet hum of nature. But it didn't take long for that comfort and hum to go disturbingly quiet. The first day was uneventful, at least at first. I parked my truck at the trailhead, loaded up my pack, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and began the familiar hike into the heart of the forest. My boots crunched over the leaf-covered trail as I climbed higher, the dense trees closing in around me. The fresh mountain air was cool, the perfect kind of crisp that made you feel alive, but something was off. I noticed it halfway through the hike. The usual sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, were missing. There was only the sound of my own footsteps and the occasional creak of the trees swaying gently in the wind. I shook it off as nerves. It was always a little eerie out here in the deep woods, especially when you were alone. That was part of the appeal. I told myself it was just the tension I'd been feeling lately. Everything weighing on my chest, turning normal things into problems. I set up camp in the clearing near the stream I remembered from previous trips. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountain ridge, casting long shadows over the landscape. The fire crackled warmly as I cooked up some canned stew, sipping from a tin cup of lukewarm coffee, trying to push away the gnawing feeling that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't until later that night, after the fire had burned low and I was stretched out in my sleeping bag, that I noticed the first real sign: footsteps. At first, I thought it was just an animal. I mean, what else could it be? Deer? Maybe a raccoon? But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like someone walking, a soft, deliberate crunch in the leaves, moving slowly as if it was circling the camp. I lay still, holding my breath, listening intently. The steps grew closer, then stopped. I sat up slowly, reaching for the flashlight and rifle by my side. The firelight flickered dimly, casting long, jittery shadows around the clearing, but there was nothing there. I scanned the tree line, heart pounding harder than I'd like to admit. Nothing moved, just trees standing tall and silent, watching. Must have been the wind, I muttered, my voice shaky. I lay back down, my grip tight on the rifle. I'd always prided myself on being a tough, no-nonsense kind of guy, but something about those footsteps didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the sound itself, it was the feeling that came with it, like I was being watched. The next morning, things got worse. My water jug was gone. I thought I'd been careful about where I left it, but maybe I hadn't sealed it tight. Maybe an animal dragged it off during the night. I searched the area looking for signs of raccoons or coyotes, but all I found were footprints. Human, barefoot, and small, like a child's. But what child would be wandering around the woods, miles away from the nearest road, in the dead of night? I crouched down, running my fingers over the soft dirt where the prints had pressed into the earth. They seemed fresh, leading in a slow, meandering pattern around the campsite before disappearing into the woods. My skin crawled, a chill running down my spine as I stared at the tracks, my mind racing through every possible explanation. None of them made sense. By midday, I had convinced myself it must have been some local kids playing a prank. Maybe I'd stumbled into someone's turf without realizing it. But as I hiked deeper into the woods, rifle ready, the sense of unease only grew stronger. Every step I took felt heavy, like the trees themselves were watching me, closing in tighter. Then I saw it. I was tracking a deer along the ridgeline when I noticed movement in the trees just ahead. At first, I thought it was the buck I'd been hunting, but then it stepped out into the clearing. A figure, tall, hunched, and gaunt. Its body was draped in shadow, but I could see the faint outline of its pale, too long limbs, twisted in ways a man shouldn't be. And those eyes. 2 glowing yellow eyes, staring right at me. I froze, rifle raised, heart hammering in my chest. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the wind dead and still around us. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just stood there, watching me. "Who the hell are you?" I called out, my voice cracking in the silence. No answer. I swallowed hard and took a step back. The figure disappeared into the trees as silently as it had appeared. My hands were shaking, the rifle's barrel wobbling as I lowered it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried to tell myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, but I knew better. I'd seen it, and whatever it wasn't human. That night, the footsteps returned, louder this time, circling the camp with purpose. I stayed awake, rifle in hand, listening to the crunch of leaves as it moved closer. Every time I thought I'd hear it right outside my tent, the steps would stop, leaving only the suffocating silence. I couldn't sleep, couldn't even close my eyes without imagining those yellow eyes watching me from the darkness. By the third day, I was a mess, exhausted, jumpy, paranoid. I hadn't seen the figure again, but I could feel it following me, watching. The forest, once my refuge, had become a prison. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how fast I walked, no matter how deep I went, it was always just behind me, waiting. That afternoon, I found more footprints. This time, they were right outside my tent, circling it in strange, looping patterns. There were dozens of them, overlapping, almost chaotic, as if someone or something had danced around the camp all night. My heart raced as I traced the tracks, panic creeping into my bones. The final straw came that evening. I was sitting by the fire, trying to calm my nerves when I heard it again. The soft, whispering voice carried on the wind. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of the trees, but I could make out one thing clearly. It was my name. Nate. I shot to my feet, spinning around, scanning the darkened woods for any sign of movement. The voice called again, softer this time, but closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, stuffed it into my pack as fast as I could, heart pounding in my ears. I needed to leave now. Whatever was out there, whatever had been stalking me for days, wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was real, and it wasn't going to let me go easily. As I slung my pack over my shoulder and reached for my rifle, I felt it, a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing at the edge of the firelight, was the figure, tall, twisted, with limbs too long and eyes glowing a sickly yellow. Its face was pale and gaunt, hollow eyes staring into me as if it could see straight through my skin and into my soul. I raised the rifle, but before I could pull the trigger, it vanished. Just gone, like smoke dissolving into the night air. I ran. I didn't care about the trail, didn't care about my gear. I ran as fast as I could through the forest, branches slapping at my face, rocks and roots tripping me up as I sprinted blindly through the trees. I could hear it behind me, the soft crunch of footsteps following, never far behind. By the time I reached the trailhead, my lungs were burning, my legs felt like jelly, and my mind was racing with fear. I threw myself into the truck, slamming the door shut. The silence inside the cab was deafening. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, finally starting the engine and peeling out of there as fast as I could. Even now, weeks later, I can't get it out of my head. The figure, those eyes, the voice that called my name, luring me deeper into the woods. I haven't told anyone about it. No one would believe me anyway, just another man who got lost in the forest, right? But I know what I saw. I know what was out there. I haven't been back to the mountains since, and every time I close my eyes, I still see it. Watching, waiting. I thought this trip would fix everything. I thought that a week out in the woods, just me and Tyler, would somehow repair the damage from the past year. The divorce hit him harder than hit me, and that's saying something. I thought maybe out here in the quiet, away from the distractions of phones in the city, we could connect again, like fathers and sons are supposed to. But from the moment we hit the road, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Tyler barely looked up from his phone the entire drive, earbuds in, scrolling mindlessly. He didn't care about the scenery, didn't care that we were headed to Deadwood Creek, a place I used to go with my own dad when I was his age. It's funny how history repeats itself. My father and I never really saw eye to eye either. He'd brought me out here hoping to teach me how to be a man, how to survive in the wilderness, and now here I was, doing the same with Tyler, hoping the Black Hills would heal something in both of us. I glanced at him as we pulled into the campground. He didn't even notice the tall, dark pines surrounding us, swaying lightly in the wind. A dense fog had settled over the creek, and the sound of water trickling nearby was the only noise besides the RV's engine. It felt different than I remembered, more isolated, lonelier. "This is it," I said, more to myself than to Tyler. "Cool," he mumbled, still scrolling, not even looking up. I sighed, cutting the engine. After we set up camp, I suggested a short hike to check out the creek. Tyler grumbled but followed me. The trail was just as I remembered, narrow, winding through the trees with the creek gurgling beside us. There was something peaceful about it, but also something off. The further we went, the heavier the air felt, like the forest was watching us. We reached the creek's edge where the water ran fast over the rocks. I crouched down, letting the cool water run over my hand. "This place used to be full of miners back in the gold rush days," I said, trying to make conversation. "A lot of people came out here looking to strike it rich. Some of them didn't make it out." Tyler shrugged. "I guess," he said. I stood up and brushed off my hands, frustrated. "You know, you could try enjoying this." He looked up from his phone for the first time and scowled. "I didn't ask to come here." I bit my tongue, holding back the argument that wanted to burst out. "Let's head back to camp." As we turned to leave, something flickered in my peripheral vision. I stopped, squinting through the trees. There, just at the edge of the clearing, a dim light floated in the distance. It flickered like a lantern, swaying in the wind. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing toward the trees. Tyler glanced up, following my gaze. "What? That light?" It was gone. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Maybe I'd imagined it. The fog had thickened while we were by the creek, and the woods were growing darker. "Never mind, let's go." The first night was when things started getting weird. Tyler and I had retreated to the RV after dinner. He was predictably glued to his phone while I tried to read a book, but the quiet gnawed at me. The stillness outside felt oppressive rather than peaceful. The wind had picked up and the pines swayed ominously against the backdrop of the night. Then I heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind, a soft, barely there sound like whispers carried on the breeze. But as I listened, it grew more distinct. Not the wind, voices, faint, disembodied voices murmuring just outside the RV. "Did you hear that?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "What?" Tyler didn't even look up. "The voices outside." Tyler pulled out one of his earbuds, frowning. "What are you talking about?" I stood up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. Nothing but fog and trees. But I could still hear the whispers just at the edge of hearing, like they were coming from the creek. I shook my head. Probably just the wind. Tyler rolled his eyes and went back to his phone, but something about those whispers unsettled me. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The next morning, the air felt even heavier. Tyler was still distant, sulking around camp, so I suggested another hike, hoping it would clear the tension between us. He reluctantly agreed, and we set off down the trail again, heading back toward the creek. But this time, the unease I'd felt the day before was stronger. Every rustle in the trees, every crack of a branch set me on edge. As we walked, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched was constant now, like eyes were following us from the shadows. Then I saw it again, the light. This time, it was brighter, flickering between the trees ahead of us, moving slowly, like a lantern being carried by an unseen hand. "There it is," I whispered, grabbing Tyler's arm. "Do you see it?" He stopped, frowning. What are you talking about?" The light flickered in and out, growing dimmer before vanishing completely. I took a step forward, but Tyler grabbed my arm. "Dad, let's just go back." I wanted to argue, but the look on his face, the fear in his eyes, stopped me. Truth be told, I was scared too. "Yeah, let's go." That night, the footsteps started. It was late, maybe past midnight, and I just managed to drift off when I heard them. Slow, deliberate steps crunching on the gravel outside the RV. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something, but the steps were too heavy, too purposeful. I lay there, holding my breath, listening as the footsteps circled the RV. They stopped by the window, then moved to the door. Tyler stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. I slipped out of bed and grabbed the flashlight. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept toward the window, slowly pulling back the curtain. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, and there, just at the edge of the light, stood a figure. It was tall, dressed in ragged, old-fashioned clothes, like something out of the gold rush era. A wide-brimmed hat covered most of its face, but I could see the gleam of a lantern hanging from its hand. The figure stood perfectly still, just watching the RV. I stumbled back, heart racing. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, searching for a rational explanation, but I couldn't find one. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure turned and vanished into the fog, the light of its lantern disappearing with it. The next day, Tyler was pale and jittery, his usual teenage indifference replaced with genuine fear. He hadn't seen the figure, but he'd heard the footsteps, and the look in his eyes told me he knew something was wrong. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "I know," I replied. "I'll start the RV. We'll head out." But when I turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. The engine sputtered, then went silent. I tried again and again, but the RV wouldn't start. "We're stuck here," I muttered, feeling the weight of dread settle over me. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, they were louder, more insistent. The figure was back, pacing around the RV, dragging something behind it. I could hear the heavy scrape of metal on gravel, like chains being dragged along the ground. "Dad, what is that?" Tyler whispered, his face pale with fear. I didn't have an answer. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped toward the door. "Stay inside," I told him. "No, don't go out there," he begged, grabbing my arm. But I couldn't just sit there, listening to the thing outside. I had to confront it. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. The figure was there, standing by the creek, its lantern casting an eerie glow over the water. It didn't move as I approached, just watched me with shadowed eyes. "What do you want?" I shouted, though my voice trembled. "What are you?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly lifted its arm, pointing to the ground near the water's edge. There, half buried in the mud, was an old rusted gold pan. I didn't understand at first, but then it hit me. The legend, the miner's ghost protecting his lost fortune. I knelt down, my hands trembling, and lifted the pan from the mud. As soon as I touched it, the figure vanished. The footsteps stopped. The whispers and the wind fell silent. The air was lighter. The oppressive weight lifted. I stood there for a long time, holding the gold pan, my mind racing. Then, without looking back, I turned and went back to the RV. The next morning, the RV started without a hitch. We left Deadwood Creek behind, and neither of us spoke about what happened. But as we drove away, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure watching us from the trees. I didn't, but I knew, deep down, that something had happened out there. Something I couldn't explain. Something I would never forget, and maybe, just maybe, Tyler and I would be okay. It wasn't my first job, and it sure as hell wasn't supposed to be my last. But something about that night didn't sit right from the beginning. Maybe it was the silence on the dispatch call, or the way the wind howled across the San Rafael desert, as if it knew something I didn't. I should have listened to that instinct, the one that makes your gut twist and your hands clench the steering wheel tighter than usual. But when the money's right, sometimes you take a job you wouldn't otherwise. The rig hummed beneath me as I barreled down I-70 heading west. The sky was bruised with the last light of day, purple streaks fading into a storm building on the horizon. I had a long way to go and no time to waste. They said the cargo was sensitive, needed to be kept at exactly 20 degrees, and if I messed up, there'd be hell to pay. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What bothered me was not knowing what the hell I was hauling. When they don't tell you what's in the trailer, it's never good. My name's Roy Mallister, bones to the few truckers who still know me on the road. 45 years old, and I've spent the last 20 behind the wheel. The road used to be a kind of escape for me, a way to outrun the things I didn't want to face. But that was before Carol passed, before I let everything else fall apart, including my relationship with my daughter Emily. I haven't talked to her in years, and I don't think about it much anymore. I'm good at avoiding things like that. But tonight, something felt different. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side of me, just red rock and dry air as far as the eye could see. I hadn't seen another car in miles, which was fine by me. The last thing I needed was distractions. That is, until the dashboard flashed red and the trailer's cooling unit flickered for the first time. I muttered a curse, pulling the rig over onto the shoulder. I cut the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed out into the gathering dusk. The wind hit me hard, dust swirling around my boots as I made my way to the back of the trailer. I could hear the cooling unit working and stuttering like it was trying to fight off some kind of malfunction. Fumbling with the latch, I yanked open the back door and was greeted with a gust of frigid air. It smelled wrong in there, like cold metal and something decayed. the kind of smell that sticks in your nose and won't leave. I shined my light into the back, trying to figure out what was causing the problem. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping. No, not tapping, scratching. It was coming from the crate, a large wooden crate strapped down in the center of the trailer, covered in heavy chains. My heart started to pound in my chest, the kind of adrenaline spike that tells you to get the hell out of there. But my feet wouldn't move. I inched closer, flashlight trembling in my grip. The scratching got louder. The crate shifted just slightly, as though something inside was alive. What the hell? I whispered, backing away. I wasn't going to open it. Not in a million years. I slammed the trailer door shut and locked it tight, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Whatever was in that crate, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I was just supposed to get it from point A to point B. No questions asked. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was an animal, I thought, some government experiment or something. None of it mattered. All I had to do was deliver the damn thing. The radio crackled to life as I accelerated, and I jumped in my seat. Static. Then through the fuzz, I heard something faint. A voice. A woman's voice. "Roy, why didn't you come back?" My heart stuttered. The voice sounded like Carol's. I smacked the side of the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the static only grew louder. The voice faded, replaced by an eerie, distorted country song, one I hadn't heard since she passed. It was one of her favorites. "No," I muttered, turning the radio off. This was just stress getting to me. The isolation, the weird cargo, and the fact that I hadn't slept in 2 days, that's all it was. That's what I told myself as I sped down that endless stretch of highway. But the farther I drove, the worse it got. The storm hit an hour later, and with it came the figures. I thought they were just shadows at first, shapes in the mist thrown up by the desert sandstorm. But as the wind howled and the sand lashed against the windshield, I could swear I saw them. People walking along the roadside. No, not people. Ghosts. Old men in trucker caps, women in long, flowing dresses, their faces pale, hollow, their eyes dark as the night. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying not to look. If I didn't look, they weren't real. That's how it works, right? I blinked hard, forcing my eyes back on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. The trailer lurched hard, like something had slammed into the back of it. "What the hell?" I shouted, swerving the rig as I fought for control. My headlights cut through the dust, illuminating the desolate highway, but there was nothing there. Nothing but empty miles. The trailer shook again, then came the knocking. Loud, rhythmic, like someone was pounding on the inside of the crate. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was done pretending it was nothing. I was done lying to myself. I had to stop. I had to see what was in that crate. I pulled the rig to the side of the road again, hands trembling as I jumped out of the cab. The wind whipped sand into my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't care. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox and made my way to the back of the trailer. The knocking hadn't stopped. It was louder now, more urgent. With a deep breath, I unlocked the trailer and threw the doors open. The cold hit me again, but this time it wasn't just the refrigeration. There was something wrong about it. The air inside was thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on me. I raised the crowbar, jammed it under the lid of the crate, and pried it open. And then everything stopped, the wind, the knocking, even the pounding of my own heart. Inside the crate, nestled in layers of straw and old cloth, was something small. It looked like a statue, a human skull, but blackened with strange symbols carved into the bone. It seemed to pulse, like it was alive, like it was breathing in time with me. And then the whispers started. Not from the radio this time, but from the skull itself. Voices swirling in my head, speaking in languages I couldn't understand. But one voice stood out, one voice I knew. Roy. I stumbled back, my heart racing as the skull began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The voices grew louder, and the wind picked up again, howling around the trailer. I slammed the crate shut and bolted the door. I didn't care what they said. I didn't care what I'd seen. I was getting the hell out of there. I threw the crowbar into the cab, jumped behind the wheel, and floored it. The trailer lurched behind me as I tore down the highway faster than I'd ever driven in my life. The storm whipped around me, and through the swirling dust, I could see them again, the figures. They were closer now, standing on either side of the road, their eyes following me. Some of them looked familiar. Faces I'd seen on the road before, long-dead truckers, friends. Then, as if the storm itself parted, I saw her, Carol, standing in the middle of the road. Her white dress flowing in the wind, her eyes locked on mine. I jerked the wheel, swerving to avoid her, but the rig skidded off the road. The trailer jackknifed as it skidded across the desert sand. I barely managed to hang on as the truck groaned to a stop, tilted sideways in a ditch. Silence. I sat there for a long time, staring out into the empty desert, trying to breathe. The storm passed, but I knew it wasn't over. I reached for my phone. No signal, no way out. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, I saw her again, Carol, walking slowly toward me, her face pale and cold, her eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. "Roy," she whispered, her voice soft but clear in the stillness. "It's time to come home." I didn't run, I didn't scream. I just sat there, waiting, as the darkness closed in around me. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, immersed in the silence for hours, but now something felt off. The kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind, no rustling in the leaves, just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life. Birds, insects, something. But the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had. Until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique I'd brought along to mess around with in my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing. Until now. I stood up from the fire, walked over to the RV, and ducked inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dial, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it. A voice, faint and garbled, speaking numbers. 1, 3, 7, 8, 9. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the numbers started again. 1, 3, 7. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere. Maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing. I was sure of it, but the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong, like the message wasn't for just anyone, it was for me. I shut the radio off. My fingers were trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day, I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods. The towering pines loomed overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, the sky just a sliver of gray through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals, just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense. I could feel it in my bones, like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch, something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate, I shook it off and stepped back outside, trying to push the growing unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost." The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. "I heard it too," he said. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Heard what?" "The signal, the numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer, his voice low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working. My cell phone drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you think it is?" Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. "I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer." I didn't know how to respond to that. I was a man of logic, of science. Signals were signals. Glitches were glitches. But there was something about the way Ben spoke, the fear in his that made my skin crawl. That night, the radio came to life again. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the campfire and the peaceful silence of the woods, but the static was louder than before. The numbers were clearer, more insistent. 1378. Ben was sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His eyes constantly scanned the dark forest around us. He hadn't relaxed since he showed up, and I couldn't blame him. There was something wrong here, something I couldn't explain. "You think it's some kind of broadcast?" I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. Ben shook his head. "I don't think it's a broadcast at all." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think it's a warning or a signal from something out there." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. A warning from what?" Before I could ask, the static on the radio cut out for a moment. There was only silence. The kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. Then a sound, a soft rhythmic clicking, like something metallic tapping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam only revealed darkness. The clicking grew louder, echoing through the forest. Then, through the radio, a voice crackled to life. "We see you." My blood ran cold. Ben's eyes widened, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The voice repeated, distorted and mechanical. "We see you." I stood up, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The clicking sound was closer now, coming from all around us, moving through the trees. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing thick and heavy, as if the atmosphere itself was alive. "I think we should leave," Ben said, his voice tight with fear. For once I agreed. The next morning, I found Ben's tent abandoned. His gear was scattered around the clearing, but there was no sign of him, no footprints, no note, just the cold, empty forest and the low hum of static that had settled into the air like a living thing. I tried to follow his tracks, but they vanished in the thick underbrush. It was as if he'd walked into the trees and disappeared. The GPS on my phone was useless, spinning me in circles. The battery drained faster than I'd ever seen. The static in my ears grew louder the further I went, as if the signal was inside my head, vibrating through my skull. The numbers were back too, repeating over and over, etched into my mind. 137. By midday, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected, an old, dilapidated radio tower hidden deep in the woods. The metal was rusted, vines crawling up the sides, but it was still faintly humming with power. I climbed the tower, every step echoing in the stillness. My heart hammered in my chest. At the top, I found the source of the signal, a small glowing device pulsing with an eerie cold light. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the original tower. It was something else, something foreign. I reached out and touched it, and the static in my head exploded. The numbers, the clicking, the voices, it all crashed into me at once, an unbearable cacophony of sound. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the tower as the forest seemed to come alive around me. The lights returned, flickering in the trees, cold and mechanical. The clicking grew louder, more frantic, as if something was chasing me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV, but the lights followed me. The clicking was never far behind, but I managed to get inside and slam the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the device still clutched in my hand. As I drove away, the static began to fade, but the numbers never left me. They echoed in my mind, a constant whisper, even as the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror. It's been days now and I'm still hearing them. 1, 3, 7. I can't get them out of my head, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever sent that signal, knows where I am. And it's not done with me yet. The road into the Adirondacks was long, winding, and empty, just how I liked it. After a few hours of driving, I pulled the RV off the narrow trail and into a small clearing by the lake. The pines stretched high and thick around me, their dark green needles blending into the overcast sky. This was exactly what I needed. Complete isolation. No people, no noise, just the quiet of the forest and the sound of my own thoughts. I parked the RV, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp, with the faint smell of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant ripple of water. Perfect. This place would give me the quiet I craved, a chance to think without the distractions of civilian life. Ever since leaving the military, I'd been chasing peace, and this felt like it could be the spot where I'd finally find it. I grabbed my gear and went about setting up camp. It didn't take long. I'd done this enough times to know the routine: gather firewood, get a small fire going, and make sure the RV was ready for a night out in the wilderness. As I made my way through the trees, something caught my eye. On one of the nearby trunks, there was a strange marking, a crude carving of a figure, long and thin, etched into the bark. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Just a kid's prank, I figured, probably a bored hiker from weeks ago. But as I moved through the forest gathering wood, I found more of them, carved figures on the trees, all tall and slender, stretching higher than any human could reach. It was strange, but I wasn't here to think about strange things. I was here to forget. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling softly, casting flickering light across the clearing. I settled in next to the warmth, staring out at the darkening forest. There was a peace in the solitude, something comforting about being alone with the sounds of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night animals scurrying about, just silence. And then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head. "You're just on edge," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the tension building in my chest. The wilderness could play tricks on you if you let it. I knew that better than most. I was here to clear my head, not to let it run wild. But then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, just for a split second, something moved. Tall, thin, just beyond the trees. I jumped to my feet, gripping the flashlight tighter, and aimed the beam toward where I'd seen the figure. But there was nothing. Only the dark outline of the pines swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, every muscle tense, waiting for something to step out of the shadows. But after a long moment, the rustling stopped, the trees swayed, and the forest fell back into its unsettling quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, staring into the fire, trying to shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The next morning, I woke early, determined to shake off the nerves from the night before. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Maybe if I put some distance between myself and the campsite, I could clear my head. The trail was faint, barely more than a thin path winding through the trees. As I walked, I found more of the carvings on the trees, each one stranger than the last. They were everywhere, slender, elongated figures with no faces, all staring outward, all watching. The forest felt darker here, the canopy thick enough that the sunlight barely broke through. About an hour in, I reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was stunning, endless trees stretching out below, the mountains rising in the distance. I was about to pull out my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I turned to see an older man, probably in his 60s, standing a few feet away. He was holding a bundle of firewood in his arms, his face weathered and sun-creased like someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, giving him a nod. "Not many people come this deep into the forest," the man replied, his voice low and rough. He looked me up and down, then glanced toward the valley. "You camping nearby?" "Yeah, just over by the lake, trying to get some quiet." He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. "You should be careful. This part of the Adirondacks, it's different." "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced around, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. "There's something in these woods. People call it the Watcher. It stays deep in the forest, watching from the shadows. You see it once, and you'll start seeing it everywhere." I laughed, shaking my head. "Local ghost stories." The man didn't smile. "It's not a story. It's real. People who see the Watcher, they don't come back the same." He took a step closer. "I'm telling you this because you look like you've seen things. You know when something's not right, and something's not right here." I met his gaze, feeling that familiar knot of unease tightening in my gut. "What do you mean?" "You'll know when it's close. You'll hear it first, and then you'll feel it." He turned, starting back down the trail. "Just don't stay too long." I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but the way he'd looked at me, like he'd seen the same thing I had last night, made it hard to dismiss. That evening, back at camp, the unease was worse. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees towering higher than I remembered, the shadows deeper, darker. The wind had picked up, making the fire flicker and sputter, but it didn't drown out the sounds. The rustling came back, louder this time, and with it, something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but the beam barely seemed to penetrate the trees. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit them, but when I moved the beam, they started again. I stood, turning in a slow circle, the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. My pulse was pounding, adrenaline kicking in. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone out here. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. And then, just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. Its body was almost skeletal, its limbs too long, its head bent slightly as if it were watching me from above. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were hollow, dark pits that stared right at me. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, it just stood there, watching, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. The figure didn't respond. It stayed still, silent, its form almost blending into the shadows. I raised my knife, backing toward the RV. The figure remained at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. For hours, I sat by the window, knife in hand, waiting for the figure to move. But it never did. It just stood there, barely visible in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on the RV. At dawn, the figure was gone, but the carvings had multiplied, dozens of them surrounding the campsite, the same tall, thin figures etched into the trees like a silent army. I didn't waste time. I packed up everything, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, the carvings seemed to watch me, following me down the narrow trail, their hollow eyes staring. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the alder, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as the trees thinned and the road stretched out in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Watcher was still out there somewhere in those woods. It was still watching, and maybe it always would be.
We thought we knew the Ozarks. Matt swore up and down that Mark Twain National Forest was a hidden gem. Untouched trails, beautiful vistas, perfect for a 3-day backpacking trip. He was always good at selling these kinds of trips, making it seem like a dream adventure. I believed him mostly because I loved him, but even then, as we parked the car at the trailhead and unloaded our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was going to be different. "Looks like we're in for some real wilderness this time," Kyle said, flashing a grin. He was already making jokes about getting lost and being eaten by cryptids. Classic Kyle. always trying to lighten the mood. I laughed it off, but something about the dense trees and the isolation made the joke sit heavy in my chest. The forest felt too quiet, too vast. Matt, as usual, was all business. He was adjusting his pack, double-checking the map on his phone. "We'll follow the GPS for most of the way," he said, his voice filled with confidence. "Should be easy, just a couple of tough climbs, but nothing we can't handle." I glanced at Sarah, who was tightening the straps on her hiking boots. She was always the tough one, competitive, never backing down from a challenge. I liked that about her, but sometimes it felt like she had something to prove, especially when Matt was around. I couldn't tell if it was admiration or rivalry. "Let's get moving," Matt called, waving us on. "We've got a lot of ground to cover." The first day went as expected. We hiked deeper into the forest, leaving behind the marked trails and venturing into the heart of the wilderness. The trees were taller here, their branches heavy with green, creating a canopy that let in only slivers of sunlight. It felt like the forest was swallowing us whole, but Matt pressed on, oblivious to the creeping unease that gnawed at me. That night, we set up camp by a small stream. The air was cooler than I expected, a bite of cold that sank into my bones as the sun set. Kyle's tent had a broken pole, something he hadn't noticed until we tried setting it up. He laughed it off, saying he'd just sleep in Sarah's tent, but Matt's frustration was clear. "Next time, check your gear before we leave," Matt snapped, his voice tight. "Relax, man. It's just a tent pole," Kyle said, but the tension between them simmered. I was too tired to deal with their bickering, so I busied myself with starting the fire. Dana, my girlfriend, snapped photos as always, capturing the last glimmers of daylight filtered through the trees. She looked peaceful behind the camera, sly, but I could tell she felt it too. That sense that something was off. That night, we heard the first howl. It was distant at first, almost like the wind moving through the trees, but then it came again. Low and deep, rising into a chilling wail that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "What the hell was that?" Sarah muttered, her hand instinctively moving toward the hatchet strap to her pack. Matt shrugged, trying to play it off. "Probably just a coyote or something. These woods are full of wildlife." But it didn't sound like any coyote I'd ever heard. I exchanged a glance with Dana, and she raised her eyebrows in that way she did when she didn't believe something. Kyle, of course, took the opportunity to joke. "Sounds like Bigfoot's out there, or maybe the Ozark Howler," he said, his voice teasing. "You guys know that one, right? Big hairy creature, glowing red eyes, hunts hikers for fun." "Knock it off," Matt said sharply. "It's just an animal. Get some sleep. We've got a long hike tomorrow." I tried to brush it off too, but lying in our tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig outside made my heart race. I must have drifted off at some point, but it was restless sleep. The next morning, Dana told me she'd seen something outside the tent just for a second, but she was sure of it. Red eyes. "I saw red eyes, Matt," she said softly. I laughed nervously, thinking she must have been half asleep. "Maybe it was just a trick of the light," I said, though even I didn't believe it. I hadn't told anyone about the dreams I'd had, the sensation of being watched, hunted, like we were intruding on something that didn't want us there. Day 2 was worse. The forest grew denser, the path less defined, and the GPS signal flickered in and out. At one point, we lost it completely. Matt insisted he could still navigate using the map, but the landscape wasn't matching up with anything. The trees felt wrong, closer somehow, like they were moving in on us. The air grew colder, and the silence pressed down like a weight. "We're lost," Sarah said flatly, glaring at Matt. "We're not lost," he snapped back. "I know where we are." But he didn't. None of us did. That night, we found claw marks on the trees, deep gouges like something had raked through the bark with claws far larger than any animal should have. Dana's hands trembled as she took pictures, but Matt dismissed it. "Could be a bear," he said, though the unease in his voice was obvious. "That's not a bear," Kyle muttered, his earlier joking tone gone. He stared at the claw marks, his face pale. "This is messed up, man. Maybe we should turn back." "We're not turning back," Matt said, his voice rising. "We've come this far. We stick to the plan." The argument that followed was inevitable. Sarah sided with Kyle, saying we were unprepared and it wasn't worth the risk. Dana stayed quiet, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Matt, stubborn as ever, refused to admit we were in over our heads. We set up camp again that night and the howling returned. This time it was closer, louder, the sound reverberating through the trees like something was circling us. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamt of those red eyes watching us from the darkness. In the morning, we found more signs. Animal carcasses torn apart, strewn across the ground. Deer, mostly, their bodies mangled in ways that didn't make sense. No predator would kill like that, not for food. It was like something had ripped them apart for fun. Kyle was the first to voice what we were all thinking. It's the howler, man. I'm telling you, this place is messed up. Matt, as always, refused to believe it. It's just a predator. Wolves, maybe. There are no wolves in the Ozarks, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Not anymore. We kept moving, but the howls followed us. Louder, closer. By late afternoon, we knew we weren't alone. We were being hunted. It was just before dusk when we saw it. We stopped to rest, setting our packs down near a small clearing. That's when Dana froze, her camera slipping from her hands. Matt, she whispered, behind you. I turned just in time to see it step out of the trees, hulking, shadowy, with glowing red eyes that burned through the dim light. Its body was massive, covered in thick dark fur, but its shape was wrong, twisted, like something caught between animal and something more. The howl that followed was like nothing I'd ever heard, a deep, guttural sound that shook me to my core. It didn't charge. It didn't attack. It just stood there, watching, as if daring us to move. We didn't. What the hell is that? Kyle's voice was barely a whisper, his face drained of color. It's not real, Matt muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Dana grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. We have to go, she said, her voice trembling now. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, its red eyes glowing brighter. Then, with one last bone-chilling howl, it slipped back into the trees. We didn't wait to see if it would return. We packed up in record time and started moving fast, too fast. The light was fading and we were stumbling over roots and rocks, our breath coming in short, panicked gasps. That night, we didn't set up camp. We just kept walking, desperate to put distance between us and whatever that thing was. The howls continued, closer, always closer. When dawn finally broke, we stumbled upon an old ranger's cabin. Its roof caved in, the windows shattered. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. We collapsed inside, too exhausted to keep going. For the first time in hours, the howling stopped. Matt stared at the floor, his face pale, his hands shaking. It's not real, he whispered, over and over again, like a broken record. But we knew better. We had heard it, seen it. The Ozark howler was real, and it had let us live for now. As we sat in that ruined cabin, the forest watching, waiting, I realized we hadn't escaped. Not really. The howler was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, and it was only a matter of time before it came back. I had been driving for hours, the Mojave Desert stretching endlessly around me, barren and vast under the relentless sun. The road was long behind me now, just an empty trail of dust leading out to nowhere. Perfect. This was exactly what I needed. A break from work, from the grind, from people. Out here, there was nothing but silence and space. No cell towers, no deadlines, no distractions. Just me and the desert. I pulled the RV to a stop near a rocky outcrop and stepped out. The air was dry and still, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing down on you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the warm scent of sand and stone. This was my escape. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, just the open sky and the endless horizon. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV in the shade of the rock formation and pulling out my gear. I wanted to explore before the light faded. There was something about the desert that always fascinated me, the way the landscape shifted from harsh to beautiful in a matter of hours. But right now, I was focused on one thing: silence. After weeks of being glued to my phone and running from meeting to meeting, the thought of being completely disconnected was a relief. No cell reception out here, no GPS signal, just me and the land. As I unpacked, I heard it, a faint sound, almost too soft to notice, a rhythmic beeping. At first, I thought it was something inside the RV, maybe an alarm or a piece of equipment malfunctioning, but after a quick check of my gear, everything seemed fine. The sound persisted though, steady and faint, like a pulse just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the desert was quiet. The only sound was the faint wind rustling through the rocks. I brushed it off, assuming it was some distant echo of the RV's systems, and finished setting up camp. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, I felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. This was why I came here, to escape, to let my mind breathe. But that night, the beeping came back. I was sitting by the campfire, watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky, when the sound returned, clearer this time. It was still faint but persistent. A soft, rhythmic pulse like something distant calling out. I stood, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Logic and reason were my tools, and they had served me well in the world of engineering. But there was something about the sound, something that felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire into the darkness. The desert stretched out before me, vast and empty. I started walking, following the faint sound. The rhythmic pulse grew louder as I moved away from the RV. For a while, I saw nothing but sand and rock. The beeping seemed to fade, then grow louder again, like it was moving with me, always just out of reach. I kept walking, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the night, but every time I thought I was getting closer, the sound slipped away. Finally, I stopped. My pulse was racing now, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The beeping had faded again, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the desert. The silence around me was heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back toward the RV. The fire still glowed faintly in the distance as I walked. The beeping returned, faint but steady, like a distant heartbeat. The next morning, the sound was gone. The desert was still quiet, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Isolation could do that. The vast emptiness of the desert, the absence of any familiar sounds, it could mess with your head. I decided to hike further out, hoping to clear my mind. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun already beating down on the sand. I grabbed my gear, making sure I had plenty of water, and started walking toward a rocky ridge I had spotted in the distance. Halfway there, I saw him, a man walking toward me from the opposite direction, his figure small against the endless desert. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. This was a remote area, far off the beaten path. As the figure grew closer, I could make out an older man, his clothes worn and dusty, his face lined and weathered from the sun. "Hey," I called out, raising a hand as we approached each other. The man nodded, his eyes distant, almost vacant. "You camping out here alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, just me," I said, a little taken aback by his bluntness. "I've been walking for days," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You heard it yet? The signal?" I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "The signal?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You'll hear it. Once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. I've been following it for days. It doesn't stop." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The man glanced around nervously, as if the desert itself was listening. "There's something out here, something that's been broadcasting for years. It gets inside your head, starts with the beeping, then it gets louder. You'll see." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. He looked dehydrated, sunburned, like he'd been wandering the desert for days without rest. I offered him some water, but he shook his head and started walking again, heading back the way he came without another word. I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, his words echoing in my mind. "Once you hear it, it doesn't stop." That night, the beeping was louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sound pulsed through the silence, steady and rhythmic, like it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sound was there, burrowing into my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, GPS, water, and set out into the desert. I had to find the source. I had to know what was causing the sound. The desert was pitch black, the sky filled with stars. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam dancing across the rocks and sand as I followed the beeping. It was louder now, almost frantic, like it was pulling me towards something. The GPS was acting strange, flickering in and out as if the signal was being disrupted. But I kept moving, my footsteps crunching in the sand. The beeping grew louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I saw it, a structure, half buried in the sand, a bunker or a weather station, long abandoned. The beeping was deafening now, emanating from somewhere inside. I hesitated, standing at the entrance of the bunker. The door was ajar, rusted and creaking in the wind. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to leave and forget about the sound. But I couldn't. The signal was pulling me in. I stepped inside. The air in the bunker was stale, suffocating. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted equipment and old, faded maps. The beeping was louder now, echoing through the metal walls, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room. In the center, there was an old radio tower, its equipment still faintly powered by some unknown source. But that wasn't what caught my attention. On the walls were symbols, strange, intricate markings that looked like they had been carved into the metal. They spiraled outward, converging on the radio tower as if they were feeding into it. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The entries were short, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They talked about the signal, how it started with the beeping, how it got louder, how it never stopped. "It gets inside your head," one entry read. "It's not just a sound, it's alive." As I read, the beeping shifted, turning into a high-pitched screech that pierced through my skull. I dropped the journal, clutching my head as the sound rattled through my brain. It wasn't just a signal, it was something more, something that had been waiting, broadcasting, pulling people in. I had to get out. I stumbled out of the bunker, the sound still ringing in my ears. The desert spun around me. I ran, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The landscape warped, the rocks and sand shifting as if the desert itself was alive, moving with the signal. When I finally made it back to the RV, I collapsed inside, my head pounding. The beeping was now a constant, dull hum in the back of my mind. I left the desert the next morning, driving as fast as I could. The beeping was still faint, but persistent. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, back in the city, I can still hear it. A faint rhythmic pulse in the back of my mind. Always there, always calling me back. The signal isn't done with me yet.